What's going on, YouTube? This is Boxingwave, and we're back with some more content. Look, Terence Crawford. Let's get right into it. He gets stripped by the WBC, all right, at 168. We know that he became undisputed by beating Canelo Alvarez during the summer, right? So he currently, well, he did have all four titles. But as of today, he's been stripped by the WBC for not paying his sanctioning fee. Now, the sanctioning fee is normally 3%, all right, of whatever your purse is. But according to WBC President Mauricio Solomon, they said that they lowered the amount because of the amount of money of the purse of Terence Crawford received in that fight with Canelo, which was 50 million, right? I don't know if that is the true amount. That's the number that has gone around, but we don't know if that is the true. I've heard different amounts, but 50 million is the number, and 3% of 50 million would be 1.5 million, which is crazy for a title. But 0.6% is what the WBC decided to adjust it to for this particular fight because they felt that 3% was too much. And that would be $300,000, which is still a lot if we're thinking about it. No belt should cost $300,000. A belt, that's a house. That's an actual house. Okay. Depending on where you live, maybe not in New York, but depending on where you live in the country, $300,000 can give you a nice, pretty nice home. And I don't think it's worth that. All right. And let me tell you this, it is a rule. It is the rule. It is what it is. You know, it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate rule because you're basically paying for a title. You're basically paying for your legacy. And this is why guys like Floyd Mayweather said that he's not going to be paying for all these belts. You know, a lot of people thought that was a cop out by not chasing undisputed. But in this scenario, when it comes to Crawford, and then I'm reading the comments and the reactions to all of this, it seems like everybody is defending Crawford, which they probably should, you know, because who's going to defend the WBC? You know, and their corruption and their fact that they break the law. There, I mentioned this earlier, that this is a rule. This is something that you agree on. You know, as a fighter, they do have sanctioning fees, right? We all know this, but the WBC break their own rules all the time. You know, I mean, look at their ranking systems. Like, you know, there's people that just pop up here and there on the rankings. Look what's happening right now with Conor Ben and him being the mandatory for a 147 title after Ryan Garcia and Mario Barrios. Why is Ryan Garcia? Why are they sanctioning that fight? You know, what has Ryan Garcia done? Um, uh, period. You know what I mean? Like, you beat Devin Haney. We know what happened there. Um, didn't make the weight, the agreed upon weight. Went over that weight on purpose, right? And then failed a drug test. Fight got overruled and turned into a no contest. So he doesn't even get the win for that. And then he goes to his very next fight and loses to Rolly Romero. But now he's getting the opportunity to fight for a WBC title at 147 against Mario Barrios, you know, who didn't even win his last fight. Didn't win the fight before that. Like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? We can go on and on all day. Like, I'm still not over the fact that you guys made a franchise title and made rules for that and then broke your own rules for that. They constantly, I mean, all the other sanctioning bodies do it as well, but the WBC is notorious. The WBC and WBA are definitely the worst when it comes to that kind of thing. So I'm never going to defend them. All I can say is that they're not bigger than the program. At the end of the day, you know, I watched the interview and shout out to Boxing Scene. Boxing Scene actually did the interview because it was the WBC convention this last, you know, over the weekend. And they just put out all the new mandatories and all the fights that's coming up, you know, and I'll do content on that, all right, on the upcoming fight. But for this title now, Hamza Shiraz and Christian Mbili are now going to fight for this title that is now vacated because Terence Crawford was just stripped. And a lot of another title eliminators was just announced by the WBC. But with all that being said, I'm never going to defend those guys because of what they do over there. There are rules, yes, and you are supposed to pay a fee. You know what I mean? But with that being said, the sanctioned bodies is not bigger than a program. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, the alphabet titles, um, the way Mauricio Solomon was saying, like he was like saying, like, listen, we supported you fighting Spence. No, that fight was supposed to happen without you guys, with or without you. We know it was undisputed, but those were the two best guys at 47 at the time. Okay. Um, so don't make it seem like the fight happened because of you. Same thing with like he brought up like Crawford petitioned to fight uh Madrimov, and moved up to 54 and fought for a title there. And yeah, okay, cool. That's great. Glad that you sanctioned that fight, but um, Crawford was already undisputed at 147, and he was the best. And he chose to move up to 54 to fight another champion, instead of taking a tune-up. Um, you're not bigger than a program, and then going up two divisions to fight Canelo, and it end up being the biggest fight, and they end up getting the best purse. You want to be a part of that. In fact, when there are no titles on a line, you guys make up titles and give them titles to fighters for big fights. That's what you do as the WBC. That's what you do. You want to be involved in fight. It's not about the fighters being involved in what you do. The fighters are fighting. The fighters are gonna fight at the end of the day. Some of these big fights on Netflix, for example, or even on Riyadh season, some of these fights are big. They don't You guys get included in it because you guys got to make money. And I know he made a comment about this is giving back to the fighters of need and stuff. I'm not saying that none of the money is being donated. I don't know the ins and outs of that. All right, but I know there's plenty of fighters that are in need of financial support and health issues, and I know a lot of them are not getting it. I do know that. I don't know where they're getting it. I know former champions, WBC champions, that have not received the support that they need, you know? Um, so let's not make it about that. Okay. You guys want money, and Crawford didn't pay you guys. So you stripped them, and you want to give the title to someone else that is probably going to pay the money. Younger fighters like Shiraz or Billy, they want a title. You know what I mean? And they're probably most likely going to pay you. Now, how is this going to affect Crawford moving forward with the WBC if he wants to pursue a title again with them? Well, it might make things a little difficult because they're probably going to want their money, or maybe they'll work something out. I don't know. But I don't think the WBC is bigger than the program. At the end of the day, if Crawford decides to want to get involved in another big fight, whether it's with Canelo or someone else, um, the WBC is going to be the one that's going to want to be involved in some kind of way, especially when there's money involved. You know what I mean? Again, it stinks because when it comes to history, a lot of that is based on titles, you know, even though these rankings are flawed, right? Some of these fighters pop up out of nowhere and they become number one ranked, like Conor Ben right now with the WBC. Conor Ben, and I'll probably make a separate video, but maybe I don't need to. Conor Ben just beat Chris Eubank Jr. at 160 in the rematch. It's 1-1. He lost the first fight. He also tested positive. All right. Before the first fight was supposed to happen 3 years ago, which led him to fighting two guys at 154 that are irrelevant. No disrespect to them. But you didn't fight any top tier fighters. In fact, you didn't fight any top tier fighters at 147 neither. So how do you beat Chris Eubank at 160 and become the number one Mando to fight the winner of Ryan, who is not deserving of that title neither, and Mario Barrios? How do you become the number one guy when you haven't fought at 147 in nearly 4 years? How do I defend the WBC and the sanctioning body? How do I defend Mauricio Solomon in his comments? I can't defend that. Not against a real fighter that is actually fighting real fighters and beating them as well. I can't defend Mauricio Solomon in the WBC ever. You know, again, we could go years and years of corruption with the WBC and can't defend them. And $300,000 is still too much, and even though it's point 0.6. I know you guys were willing to make an adjustment for him, but you can't justify you getting that much money. When a fighter's purse is 100K and they're fighting for a WBC title, maybe 3K, yes, I guess it's going to be adjusted 3%, 3K, but they're still paying the sanctioner fees, especially if it's a unification. You're paying for more titles. You're paying your trainer, you're paying your promoter, you're paying your manager. You're not paying a promoter, but the promoter, we get it. The purse is everything is discussed between the promoters and everything. Like, at the end of the day, bro, we can't defend you. And if Crawford got in the way with making history without having to pay you, because we already knew he wants to stand at 168. So if he got out of it without having to pay you and put money in your pockets, I'm not going to be mad at it. I'm not, especially with your history, you know? So again, yes, rules are set in place, and that is a rule. And once you agree to fight for that title, naturally, yes, you're supposed to follow the rules. But the WBC has never followed their own rules. And you can't justify anything that they do over there. All right. And again, when it comes to Conor Ben Ryan, Mario Barrios, I know these fights are big fights. Manny Pacquiao, I know these fights are big fights. I looked at the rankings. There's no names that stand out. So let's throw Conor Ben in front. I understand that, but you know what? Start justifying the rankings a little better, and maybe people will have support. You know, put the guys in front that get big wins, quality wins. Quality wins against other fighters that may not be as popular by name, but they're quality fighters. You know, because maybe they will get their time to shine. Stop putting these guys that can get in as much trouble as they can throughout the year. You know, you could be a guy like Ryan Garcia, and I'm gonna always bring it up. You can be like a guy like Ryan Garcia, go to a complete racial rant meltdown, right? And everybody, because of his name and because of how popular he is, everybody who can do interviews with him and forgive him and just blame it on mental health, you know, um, and just give him a pass. He's not even talking about an opponent. He's just talking about a specific group of people. And we can all give him a pass. He can miss weight. He can take drugs. He can lose fights and still be rewarded after. So no, we can't defend the WBC ever because you're part of the problem. Big part of it. All right. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it at that. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, smash the like button, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.